So I'd like to thank Zarni for inviting me and for all of your patience. It's always hard to do presentation via technology. So I am really pleased with the patience you've all shown thus far. My presentation is going to be about how mass atrocities end, which may be slightly out of step with the way the rest of the presentations have been discussing the particular situation of the Rohingya today. But I'm hoping it'll still be helpful and relevant. I wanted to start by saying that there is a difference in how I'm going to be speaking about endings in terms of, first of all, declines, and second of all, improvements. They're not obviously separate ideas. Clearly, a decline in, for instance, mass killing could be counted as an improvement. But what I want us to imagine is decline as a negative concept, right? As in getting a government or perpetrators to halt certain activities, and improvement as a positive step. That means changes to increase protection or access to improvements in conditions of life. In the field of genocide and mass atrocities, endings largely not been disaggregated. There's been a general understanding of endings as including ending killing, ending the context of instability, which is often conflict, changing conditions that enabled killing or that enabled mass injustice, power imbalances, impoverishment, disenfranchisement, and so forth, as well as punishment for perpetrators. And the idea behind our research project is to pull these different phenomena apart and try to understand how endings happen in a disaggregated way, to separate them, not only how different types of endings occur, but then what policies can hasten which type of ending, decline, improvement. And I also, for this talk, will be switching from the language of genocide or mass atrocities to one of patterns, so that we pull these different phenomena apart. To that end, I wanted to just very briefly show you a couple slides related to endings in other cases, so we get a sense of what the patterns are. Zarni, do you have those available? I can see on my screen.
Do you have a microphone, the extension?
I don't.
You don't? Okay. Just 1 second. I need to bring your slide up.
Okay.
Yeah. You can keep talking like as I'm trying to do that.
Okay. So what we're going to see on these slides are from just a handful of cases that we've been doing research on. And the main thing that I wanted to point out on these was what we would call the spiky nature of mass atrocities understood as mass killing. And what you see repeatedly, and what is borne out in new research, is that mass killing tends to happen, and I'll show with my hands in case the slides aren't up, tends to happen very close to the onset of mass instability. You see a huge spike and often a very similar sharp decline in violence. So mass killing, that kind of direct, organized campaign of killing, tends to happen in very concentrated moments throughout the cases that we've been looking at, regardless of whether they happen in peacetime, in sort of revolutions, for instance, or during armed conflict. And so part of what we've been trying to do is what causes those sharp declines. And you can roughly divide them into two contexts. One is success, right? Not a happy ending. But in those cases, rarely do you see an attempt to completely wipe out. More frequently, what you see is a measure of success that is control, and then an ability to normalize conditions and terms that benefit perpetrators. The other sort of ending that we see is when there is a change in policy, right? So that whoever's carrying out actions decides that they have to change those policies. And that can happen when moderates arise within a regime or within a power structure. We have several cases documented in that. It can also occur when it becomes intolerable for them to continue. Now, whether that's by outside critique, the kind of sanctions that our speaker was addressing to make continuation of the program intolerable. Another such case would be when there is resistance, and sometimes that makes continued perpetration impossible to continue. And then the third ending, just the one that I think people most often imagine is the should be the ending, is when the perpetrators are. This actually is extremely rare. It has happened not that often in history, and I don't maintain for much length of time a single campaign of violence. And yet that is what most of our attention in the field of genocide and mass atrocities has been on.
Okay, what is the number? What is the figure? 3?
I think there's like 3 or 4. That's the only slides that are there. So that's the Bosnia one. If you look at I believe it's the blue on that one, are civilians. You can see the severe spike in the first year. Over 40% of the civilians killed in Bosnia were killed in the first few months of the conflict, right? And then Srebrenica, which is the 1995 spike. This kind of pattern, as you'll see in some of these other slides, repeats. And what we're trying to get there is to an understanding of what causes them to go down, but then also how does that ending relate to the continuation of other forms of violence? And the main sort of gist of our research here is that we are actually somewhat better as an international community outside of violence at paying attention to those spikes and at sort of corralling resources to tend to that phenomenon. Those tend to shorten naturally, although not this is a natural phenomenon on their own. And what is possibly even more difficult to end, more difficult to see, to document, and to make fundamental changes in, is the kind of violence that we are seeing today against the Rohingya. So the types of oppression, including violence, but not the massive, overwhelming scale, dislocation, disenfranchisement, isolation, and creating the conditions of life that severely hamper groups' ability to survive. These can be harder to change. They're less dramatic. They include a broader array of measures and also social acceptance. They can be much more a part of the normative, a sort of new normative standard in a society. But nonetheless, what's important to changing those patterns is precisely the work that I know Zarni and I'm sure many other of you have been engaged in, of documenting state participation, so direct engagement in violence, but also state permission. That is the two ways in which formal policies contribute to the continuing cycles of violence. And these endings are probably best understood not in terms of declines necessarily or halting actions, but in terms of improvements. What are the specific things that will start to change the conditions of life for people at risk? Thank you. I'm sorry if I've gone on too long. I know it's hard with technology to listen.